All right, bear witness to the true hero that put it all on the line for us to survive, King Solomon. Now, going back into his childhood, Solomon was one of the many children of David, the second king of Israel, his mother being Bathsheba. He is the one that was destined to carry on David's legacy after their first child was eliminated as a punishment from God. As a matter of fact, the name Solomon stands for peace as acknowledgement of David's past mistakes. Now, when it came to a point when David was getting up in age, his other son, Adonijah, tried to take advantage of this by claiming that he will be the next king to rule over Israel. It was here where the prophet Nathan told Solomon's mother, excuse me, ma'am, why is this dude out here saying he's the king? Solomon is the one that's supposed to be the king. Now you get your ass in there and tell David to make Solomon his next heir. Y'all gonna fuck around and mess up the whole timeline. So she goes in and tells David accordingly, with Nathan backing up her word, and Solomon becomes the next ruler at the modest age of 15. Now, mind you that everybody still thinks that Solomon's brother is the real king. He's making all of these demands. He's sacrificing their resources. He even went as far as inviting his own brother to celebrate his position. So while they're down in the hall having this feast, the guests could hear the music from Solomon being anointed on the other side. Everybody starts looking around the room like, what's that noise? What noise? I didn't hear anything. Then the priest literally burst into the room like, yeah, I just wanted everybody to know that Solomon is the new king, just in case anybody had it confused. Oh my goodness, that food smells delicious. Now everybody in the room is pissed off. They're getting up out of their chairs. This man Adonijah is really a fraud. At this point, Adonijah knew how this could play out for him, so he went and threw himself on the altar begging Solomon for his forgiveness. Even at the young age Solomon was, he thought nothing of it. If you truly mean what you say, then you don't have anything to worry about. But if I ever find you disrespecting the Lord again, it's over with for you, homie. On God. As his last days began to close in, David started to give his final words to Solomon to keep his head on straight and stay true to the gospel. After they had things settled, Solomon decides to send Adonijah back home as he was only his half-brother. But that was not the end. Adonijah decides to come back, telling Solomon's mother that he wants to make one of David's servants his wife. Solomon's mother told him about this request in his place, and Solomon was furious. The problem here was that since this was David's servant, Solomon knew this was just a roundabout way of his brother trying to assert dominance as a king once again. So Solomon tells his mother, oh, he thinks I'm playing. Okay, we'll see about that then. He then sends out the great Benaiah and has his brother knocked off in no time. He makes Benaiah one of his new commanders, and he makes Zadok the new priest. In his time as the king, Solomon was often devout to the Lord, so one day he headed down to Gibeon to make 1,000 burnt offerings. God came to visit him in a dream and asked him what he would like to receive in return. Well, since you're feeling generous, that new BMW don't look too bad, but in reality, Solomon's wish was quite the opposite. Instead of asking for more riches or bigging up his name, he asked the Lord for a better understanding on how to govern his kind. Because of this, the Lord blessed Solomon with an impeccable mind, claiming that not one person of his kind has come before him, and not one person moving forward will be the same after. God even threw in a bonus, saying that if you stay true to my word, I'll even be sure to extend your life. Shortly after that, his newfound wisdom was put to the test. He receives a request from two women that got into an argument. One of them suffocating their own child to death after its birth, and the other one claiming that her child was stolen after the former took out her own. So Solomon says, one of you guys are lying. Cool. He brings out a sword and told them to cut the baby in half. If the story is actually true, they both would get equal parts. The one who wasn't the mother was all for the plan, which also was able to reveal to Solomon that she was the one that was lying. The true mother was able to get her child back, and Israel stood in shock at Solomon's remarkable deed. Venturing off into his reign, Solomon was the third king of Israel. The people were satisfied under his rule and served him faithfully throughout all of his days. Despite him not asking for wealth, his pockets ended up massively deep in the end. He had 40,000 stalls of horses, 1,400 chariots to use with them, and 12,000 horsemen ready and willing to put their life on the line. Eventually, he decided to begin the construction of a temple for God. For this, he knew that he was gonna need some help. Thankfully, Hiram, the king of Tyre, was tight with David before he passed away and hoped to keep their relationship going. Solomon was able to strike a deal with the king and had many of his men gather materials for the temple. The plan was for Hiram's men to gather cedar and juniper trees, and for Solomon's men to gather the stone. Of course, he paid them well after the fact. We then dive off into the 4th year of Solomon's reign, nearly 480 years after the Israelites were driven out of their home. He held nothing back when he was creating God's temple. He had gold laid out on the floors, through the main rooms, chains hanging down from the ceiling, several symbolic lions, and even a golden throne to match. The foundation for the temple started in its 4th year, but the work wasn't complete until the 11th year of Solomon's reign, meaning it took 7 years for him to make this structure. The next task involved him building his palace. Just as he had done with the temple, he made sure that everything in the palace stood out greatly. Now that he had those creations out of the way, Solomon began to bring forward the biggest names out of all of Israel, the elders, the heads of the tribes, and the chiefs of the families. They were then tasked with bringing the Ark of the Covenant all the way from Zion to the temple in all its glory. And of course, it is this same chest that contained the 10 commandments from God. Once they had the chest settled in, he stood in front of all of his people, blessed them for their hard work, and then thanked the Lord for maintaining all of his promises. He then heads over to the altar to make even more acknowledgments with the prayer. He kindly pleaded to God to forgive the people when they've been led astray, when they have turned their back on their neighbor, when they have lost their sight via battle, when there is no rain for the crops to flourish, when there is no food, several diseases, and other disasters, when foreigners come unknowingly from other nations, for the people that battle against God's enemies, and most of all, keep his hands on the Israelites in particular. He goes on to offer a grand sacrifice of 22,000 oxen and 120,000 sheep. He throws a grand feast that lasted for 7 days that stretched all the way from Lebanon to the brook of Egypt. God appeared to Solomon a second time, stating that if he stays true to his word, his successor will always have a place in Israel. But if he turns his back on him, his people will see nothing but disaster, and the entire temple will be brought to ruins. Although a lot of structures were built under his name, this work would normally fall on the hands of other people. All of the people that weren't of Israel, like the Hittites, were turned into servants. The Queen of Sheba was one of the many people who were skeptical of Solomon's wisdom, but when she saw how he was treating his people and how he answered all of her questions without flaw, she knew that those rumors had to be actually true. When she came to make her first visit, she hooked Solomon up with several gifts, and he showered the queen with whatever she wanted in return. He later goes on to make her one of his many wives. As far as anything concerning his wealth, for years on end, he had his allies travel across seas, and they brought back gold and other riches that kept him as the wealthiest king of his time. Many people journeyed all the way over to his kingdom just to hear the wise words that he had to say. Now, when more foreigners started to show up at his location, this came with a lot of foreign women. But God told Solomon that he couldn't wife up these women because he knew that they would turn his heart away from his word. Unfortunately, he ended up joining the competition for having one of the greatest harems of all time. This man had a grand total of 700 concubines and 300 wives. Clearly, him and Astolfo really got something to prove. This man was dunking on everybody. This led him into going after people like the foreign Sidonian goddess, which is exactly what God told him not to do. Solomon was even out here building temples for these women and their gods and didn't consider how disrespectful it was to his own. Now you have God posted up in heaven like, these dudes really take me for jokes. Now I gotta pack you up. To do this, he empowered 3 individuals. Rezin, Hadad the Edomite, and Jeroboam were all people that were aligned against him. A prophet came to Jeroboam and told him that this dude Solomon is out here tripping. And because of this, I'm gonna rip the kingdom out of his hands and I'm gonna bestow you with 10 tribes. Now, I'm not gonna take everything from him because I got a lot of respect for David. I rock with David because, you know, he actually kept his promise. But as far as Solomon goes, he gotta get this work. So he made plans to leave Solomon with only 1 tribe. Once he found out about the situation, Solomon conspired to put Jeroboam 6 feet deep. But of course, Jeroboam, being guided and protected by the Lord's will, was able to escape his death and flee into Egypt until Solomon passed away. His rule lasted for a rather impressive 40 years, and his son Rehoboam was the one to stand in his place. And just as God said, the temple was destroyed, his kingdom went to ruin, and his son was left to deal with the divide. Completely unrelated to Solomon's original story, there was a spell book that was created more than a millennium later that details Solomon's ventures into magic. This is known as the Lesser Key of Solomon, which explores him summoning 72 demons and also claims that he received a ring from God that allowed him to invoke these creatures as well as angels. This is how he was able to receive his 10 rings in fate. The seal that was said to be on the ring would further serve as the prototype to the Star of David. Let me know what you guys think. Like the video if you enjoyed it. Shout out to all the patrons, and I will be back with more Tight Moon content. It is your boy Tsiah. I'm out.